The US will not accept Chinese imports, decimating new industries. China produces enough electric vehicles, solar panels, and refines enough petroleum for all of Europe and Asia. And Elon Musk, China and Russia's biggest fanboy, has said that Chinese electric vehicle firms will demolish rivals without trade barriers. So this must seem like music to your ears, right? But Janet Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, did not threaten new tariffs on China for their electric vehicles. The US is trying to prevent another China shock that happened in the early 2000s when China just flooded the world market with very cheap goods, especially steel products, which really hurt the American steel industry. But in all honesty, it wasn't just the China shock that did this. We should also blame NAFTA. And the Chinese have responded. They said we will not sit idly by and ignore it. Nor should they, since BYD is a Chinese electric vehicle manufacturing firm, and it is almost the same market share as Tesla, at least when it comes to electric vehicles. Unfortunately for China, the US is doing this at the worst time for them. China needs the West to buy their products, especially their electric vehicles, because they have spent so much on that kind of investment. But China is going through deflation right now, and domestic demand is quite low. Like I said in my earlier video, China has overexpanded in manufacturing and has overproduced. Inventories are rising in China, forcing producers to drop down prices. China is desperate to sell these discounted goods in order to avoid another Great Depression. But if those Chinese products flood the Western and Japanese markets, then guess what happens to our own industries? This is America's extra turn of the screw in crushing and stagnating the Chinese economy. The beginning of all this is when Trump began to sanction China by not allowing Huawei and ZTE to be used for federal equipment. Those sanctions expanded into several other main Chinese sectors. But the most deadly blow that the US has struck against China is the sanctions on their semiconductor industry. Right now, to have the most innovative technology, you need the highest quality and smallest semiconductors. Right now, Taiwan with TSMC make the best semiconductors in the world, and the Dutch with ASML are right up there, and China is not getting access to their cutting-edge chips, meaning that the US is slowing down China's ability to technologically progress. If China can't innovate as rapidly as the other developed countries, then they start to lose market share. What companies stand to benefit from this? Germany, South Korea, America, and of course Japan. That's why China needs to get their stuff out now, but the United States isn't letting them. Russia, I'm sure, would be willing to help. But look at Russia's little economy here compared to the United States and their allies. That's the market China wants and needs in order to stop this economic meltdown. But one thing that China has going for it is that it is a huge economy that most of the world depends on. They just want to stagnate it and contain it. And if the Chinese economy begins to crash too fast, the rest of the world will step in to help because we rely on them. My name is the Geo Husar, and you should see the post I made about Japan and China having so many similarities. Thanks for watching.
What is happening to the Chinese economy right now? Once seen as a nation of skyrocketing economic growth, China now is seeing decline. This Monday, the World Bank cut China's forecast growth from 4.8 to 4.4% for 2024. And this is not just China, but all of East Asia and also the whole world really, especially after we pick up from the pandemic. But focusing back to China, it seems like the most concerning area of decline is within customs and imports, which have plummeted by 12.4% compared to last year. Exports have also contracted by 14.5%, exceeding the expected 12.5% decline. And this raises lots of questions as to consumer behavior and consumer habits for the rest of this year and next year. And yeah, it seems like consumers in China are also feeling the effects of this, with record high youth unemployment and an overall deterioration in purchasing of luxury items. According to a Jing Daily article, it seems that luxury stores are starting to create artificial queues to encourage people to visit and purchase, as people now have less money to spend on such luxury items. And an even worse affected area, of course, is the housing market, as we can see around the world. And this is for both buyers and sellers, as no one is willing to buy properties currently valued at listing prices. the managing director of the China Market Research Group pointed out that both small business owners and consumers are hesitant to spend or invest, a sentiment exacerbated by the government's modest stimulus efforts. So when looking back into the field of luxury consumption, what exactly can luxury brands do right now to reach their consumers, especially Chinese Gen Z, who were forecast to be the world's highest spending consumers? Being seen as expensive or having a high price or being luxury alone is not sufficient, as people tighten their purse strings for now.
We all know that China is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to economics, but why have we been seeing headlines like this talking about how the Chinese economy is beginning to weaken over the past number of months or so? Let's get into it. Now, in case you're unaware how big of a powerhouse China is economically, they are the second largest economy in the world, with this being their GDP. Now, their GDP is largely made up about 33% with industrial manufacturing, producing low-cost goods for the West, as well as about 25 to 35% of this is based on real estate, and then the rest is largely focused on wholesale and retail trading, as well as investing in things like infrastructure. Now, the first major problem that China is seeing is in their real estate sector, because Chinese real estate is literally a Ponzi scheme. I've gone over that in more detail, but really quickly, real estate developers were taking loans, that's debt. They were able to pay off the interest of that debt because they got retail investors to give them money for prepaid homes. But then they stopped building or finishing those homes, so retail investors stopped giving them money so they couldn't pay off their debt, and now they're going bankrupt. And the other problem is that the Chinese population is changing. As you can see here, the middle class has been growing really rapidly. But the population as a whole has been getting way older because of China's one-child policy. Now, this is really bad for a manufacturing-focused economy, because if your population is remaining the same or slowly decreasing, but is also getting older and the middle class is expanding, this means that your labor market is decreasing, and that supports your ability to manufacture goods. So China finds itself at an interesting crossroads where it knows it needs to switch to more of a consumer-based economy, which is a little bit of a philosophical challenge since they're technically communist.
China's whole economic model is being upturned. China has really relied on real estate spending, investment spending to boost their economy, to the point where about 1/5 of apartments in urban China are empty. It really relied on investment spending to boost their economy and hasn't really relied on the people within their economy. Household income growth and balance sheets are both deteriorating in China, but they don't want to provide support to their people because that would potentially diminish the need for the People's Bank of China. Problem is, what they've done over the past several years has really worked. So building these factories, building the skyscrapers, building the roads, it got China to where they are today, but no longer is that economic model sustainable. Xi highlighted that they need to focus on long-term goals, not pursuing Western-style material wealth. However, Western-style material wealth is probably the only way that their economy is going to grow. Michael Pettis wrote a piece about how China can fix their economy, and he outlined 5 ways. They can build new technologies, which they haven't been very good at, they can consume more, or they can do nothing. All of these things are going to have material consequences for the economy, and it just depends on what direction they want to take it.
China is doing a very good job of managing its economic downturn. They are facing a crisis with the same potential consequences as the Great Leap Forward, but it may turn out to just be a 2008 Great Recession or a little bit of the Great Depression for them. They've clearly overbuilt in the real estate market to the point where the entire population cannot fill the homes. They've grossly overbuilt in their manufacturing capacity, and they have clearly overlent to their local governments. Everything you're hearing about Evergrande and the China stock market collapsing, that's this right here. This isn't something that could have been easily stopped a few years ago. The momentum behind this was longer than a generation. The Chinese government knew they had to face the music for quite some time, which is why they're allowing this bubble, or all of these bubbles, to burst. But instead of it being one big pop, I think they're all doing a very slow, deflating. They are the only economy facing deflation right now. Japan has been struggling with deflation for decades. They've had several bubble bursts, and yet they're still one of the largest and most well-functioning economies on Earth. Their stock market has lost about $6 trillion since COVID, but the government is doing what they can to prop it up. And who knows, it might work. The Chinese economy does have a lot going for it. They are the world's factory. They produce 55% of the world's steel. They are the world's largest producer of cement, the 3rd largest producer of copper wire, which is becoming ever more precious. While they are not at Taiwan's level or even the US's level of producing semiconductors, they still do make some of the more advanced chips. They have been taking advantage of this long streak of dirt cheap oil and filled their reserves. Fun fact, they are the world's largest producer of trees. In 2021, they planted 2.5 billion trees, which is more than 6 million trees planted a day. And by far, their biggest ace in the hole is that they are, for the time being, the world's largest producer of rare earth elements, which pretty much goes into anything electronic, electric. Side note, the US just discovered the largest deposit of rare earths in the world in Wyoming, so we may become the #1. But even still, the world heavily relies on China, especially the United States. And yes, the United States is moving its factories from China to Mexico, but they're not going to do that across the board. And as long as China maintains a steady food supply, I don't think we're going to see any major catastrophic collapse. I cannot stress the importance of a steady food supply enough. Between 2000 and 2020, the country's food self-sufficiency ratio decreased from 93.6% to 65.8%. China is the world's largest food importer, which is why I don't think China is going to be invading any islands anytime soon, because China is already being sanctioned by the West, which is harming their economy. And any invasion on this island, which produces the world's best semiconductors, would most likely result in much worse sanctions that may affect the food supply. The United States has been working diligently to arm Taiwan to the teeth for decades. They are spending quite a bit on their military, so of course nobody's going to invade them. Will they invade somebody else? Keep in mind, I know that China and Russia are allies, but Russia stole a lot of Chinese land in the very late 1800s. China calls it Western Manchuria, which is incredibly resource rich, but is barely developed by the Russians. Now here's a theory that I share with Chad Scott, another great creator. China has already strangled the Russian economy, especially the ruble, to pretty much get whatever they want from it. Yet even still, China's economy is suffering. Not being in America's good favor bites hard. Some of China's aggressive posturing in the South China Sea, also along this area, seems a bit threatening. Or it could be establishing some kind of leverage which can be negotiated towards a better goal. So just keep this region in mind as time goes by. Overall, I just don't see this adding up as some catastrophic meltdown for the entirety of China. China's population is too big and its economy is too interconnected with the rest of the world for everyone to just sit idly by and watch China, worst case scenario, implode on themselves. The West would come to the rescue because, like it or not, they do need China to function. The Chinese government knows this, which gives them a little bit extra wiggle room to do what they're doing. I'm the Geo Husar. Yes, I am on vacation, and yes, this is a sunburn on my face. Thanks for watching.
A lot of factories are closing in China. China's not doing as well as it did before COVID. And I'll tell you, some of the bigger companies that I know that are even technically competitors of mine in China are ripping people off. They're not delivering when they're supposed to. They're taking money and they're not delivering the product because, I don't know, they're going bad. I can tell you some really good stories. Maybe I will in the future, but it's hurting. It's hurting over there.